Too Much Information is a production of iHeart. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Too Much Information, the show that brings you the little-known details and secret stories behind your favorite movies, music, TV shows, and more. We are your post-grunge troubadours of tedium, your minor falls of facts, your major lifts of learning, your cold and broken hallelujahs of hilarity, but we'll let you choose which one is which. My name is Jordan Runtagh.
And I'm Alex Heigl.
And today we're looking at what I think is one of the most unique albums of the 90s. I'm talking about Jeff Buckley's Grace, which turns 30 in a few weeks. The record is a tantalizing glimpse at one of the great unfulfilled musical promises of the decade. Jeff Buckley was a one-of-a-kind talent who was at the start of what seemed like a long and fascinating career when he drowned in Memphis at the age of 30. Now his entire musical legacy rests on this, the only album he completed in his lifetime. On its 10 tracks, you catch glimpses of all the directions he could have traveled with a soaring, multi-octave range and technical virtuosity. The poses are all there, from jazzy chanteuse, chanteur, what's the masculine of chanteuse? Chanteur, thank you. To hard-rocking guitar hero, East Village poet, and Lower East Side punk, and heck, there's even Pakistani qawwali vocalists in there. It's an album that embraces so much, but defies definition. He would describe himself as, quote, the warped love child of Nina Simone and all four members of Led Zeppelin, with the fertilized egg transplanted into the womb of Edith Piaf, out of which is born and left on the street to be tortured by the bad brains.
He had quite a way with words. Yeah, I mean, he would have been amazing on Twitter.
And podcasts.
Yeah, and podcasts. His diary entries are just like
Yeah.
like so literary. I mean, but just... Yeah, what a talented kid.
Yeah. I mean, this was an album, I don't know about you, but I came to this through covers, which is ironic because its biggest track is one of the most famous covers in music. Hallelujah was big during our upbringing thanks to Rufus Wainwright's version on the Shrek soundtrack.
Yep.
And that's kind of what led me to Jeff's version. And so did a piano version of the slightly lesser-known Grace track, Lover, You Should Have Come Over. And that was done by the British light jazz vocalist Jamie Cullum, who is a staple of our independent radio stations outside of Boston in the early 2000s. Heigl, I imagine your journey to Grace and Jeff Buckley had a lot more grit and integrity than mine.
It didn't. It had the exact same one.
Oh, good. I feel better. Okay.
Yeah, I had the Shrek soundtrack, and then like downloading like 17 mislabeled versions of Hallelujah.
Yep.
I think I actually I heard the Rufus Wainwright run, and then I went to LimeWire and like looked up Hallelujah and got the Leonard Cohen one and was like, "What is this garbage?"
Yeah.
And then found the Buckley one, and that just stuck in my brain. I mean, it's one of the greatest recordings of all time. How could it not stick in your brain? But that like stuck in my brain, and then I think I finally heard the rest of Grace. But he's so uniquely sad because it's just like, I mean, there's this one thing that was just like, the whole thing about sophomore albums, right, is that you spend your whole life making your first record, and then you have a year or two at best to make your second. But, like, he didn't spend that long at his first one.
No, Grace, not at all.
So Grace still feels like the unfulfilled promise. You know? It seems like he would have, with some maturity, he would have reined in and really honed this vision. So
he would have had a masterpiece. I mean, not that Grace isn't, close to a masterpiece, but he probably would have had something, up there with, I don't know, OK Computer or...
And just the fact that he was so eclectic and could do all of that crazy shit with his voice, man. I mean, he could have done standards records out there. He could have been like Rod Stewart, just like mining the Great American Songbook for like a decade plus, and it would have been better than Rod Stewart's work, but it would have just been still so endlessly fascinating because he was such a magpie and just so musically omnivorous, Yeah, it's incredible. Actually, this record didn't really do, it didn't do numbers for me. What really did was I had a roommate in Brooklyn. I'm trying to stop myself from saying that he sucked, but he was a huge Buckley head and played the extended. Is it Shiny?
I thought it was Cine, but what do I know?
No, because it's Gaelic, and so Sinead O'Connor. So it's Sinead whatever. He played the legacy version of that with like, he played me Buckley's version of The Way Young Lovers Do,
Oh,
Be My
yeah.
Husband,
Yeah.
like all this stuff. And that is just that more than Grace. I was just like, holy this kid is like a phenom. I mean, he's like Nina Simone, honestly, but like no shame to Nina, obviously. Like I love Nina Simone, but like a much better vocalist in the way that both of them were able to interact with both of their instruments, like voice and guitar or voice and piano, in a truly incredible, seamless way. I mean, you listen to like The Way Young Lovers Do, and it is just a showcase of one singular, like, incorporated bit of artistry between his voice and guitar playing. It's really wild.
That's interesting to me that you, in a really reductive term as a singer-songwriter, viewed him seemingly first and foremost as an interpreter of songs. And the thing that always blew me away was his songwriting. I mean, interpreter is such a disservice. I mean, he was like a jazz artist, like, the way that you wouldn't say John Coltrane interpreted My Favorite Things. I mean, he reinvented it, I mean, I would argue, because there's just like I don't know, interpretation just sounds like a cover version. And what he was really doing was like transforming them, like The Way Young Lovers Do. When I finally heard the Van Morrison version, because I was super late to Astro Weeks, like when I heard it, I was like, this is lounge jazz. Like it doesn't have any of the insane power that Buckley brings to it. Not just with the insane runs and stuff that he's doing with it, but yeah, I mean, I could have listened to him do that for the rest of his career, just like the soul. I mean, and in his own songs too. He's obviously a beautiful songwriter, but like that distillation of voice and guitar, like I would be hard pressed to think of another male and maybe another female, like for guitar too. Yeah, I mean, he might have the most like seamless control of that idiom of just like my voice plus a guitar. Like he may be the greatest to have done it. I mean, you could argue that like, oh, Dylan or like blah, 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 blah. But like just in terms of technical talent on both of those things and integrating them. Yeah.
He's not just like strumming or hacking at guitar. Like it's really, I don't know. I mean, that's my hyperbolic take on him.
What you obviously are a trained musician and I am not. So for me, I think I was drawn to the emotion of his original songs. I mean, the whole brooding romantic thing.
I mean, Lover You Should Have Come Over is like, should have been like a 40s jazz standard.
Yeah.
Like,
oh my God. I mean, when I was a teenager, I thought that song was the most romantic song I'd ever heard in my life, even though I was then and am still repulsed by the term lover. But I mean, just... Yeah, I mean, even just the scansion, and I'm not a lyric guy by any stretch of the imagination, but the rhythm of the words and the way they all just fell like dominoes into one another, I just was always blown away by. Lonely is the room, the bed is made, the open window lets the rain in, burning in the corner is the only one who dreams he had you with him. I mean, it sings itself. My body turns and yearns for a sleep that won't ever come. Great internal rhyme. It's never over, my kingdom for a kiss upon her shoulder. It's never over, all my riches for her smiles when I've slept so soft against her. It's everything I love and hate about this type of stuff. I mean, I think when I was younger, I used to think I was sensitive, and now I realize I just like melodrama. But I mean, he's like Jacques Brel. I mean, he's like, sure. he definitely is in that lineage. I gotta say, I never was into the more like hard rocking songs that he did. That was not, I was more into the very like, emotional, ethereal.
Yeah, the Zeppelin stuff is one of those things that's really interesting because of his friendship with Chris Cornell. And like Chris Cornell is like, to me, and not just me, considered like the heir apparent to Robert Plant of that generation, just in terms of range and timbre. But Buckley, like, he's better than Robert Plant. I mean, he has a 4-octave range, and Robert Plant had like ruined his within like a year and a half of being Led Zeppelin. And Robert Plant can't scat. Like, he can't ad-lib and invent the same way Buckley could. So, yeah, it's weird. It just feels to me like stuff like Mojo Pin and some of the more rockin' stuff might have gotten like ironed out of his system as he sort of progressed. But who's to say? I mean, he wept when he met Jimmy Page, so...
I mean, who among us?
Who among us? I probably wouldn't weep. I'd probably be like, give me your money. You old I deserve it.
A part of my entry to Jeff Buckley that I didn't mention was that I started digging into him because I knew of his father, who we'll talk about, the folk singer Tim Buckley, who died in the mid-'70s, and he was cited on all the VH1 approved lists of early rock casualties. So that was actually, if I'm honest with myself, the initial entry point to Jeff. I thought it was so spooky that there was this father and son who, again, as we'll talk about, barely got to know one another, who both became singers and both died young and tragically. So for me, he was initially more of like a pop cultural figure than a musical one, because when I was a tween, I bought a book called Dream Brother, which is by the great music journalist David Brown, who's since become a friend of mine, and he has a new book out, a great oral history on the Greenwich Village, which is due out soon, so everybody check that out. But he was really the first journalist who championed Jeff Buckley in a big way. He wrote a New York Times profile on him way back in 1993, long before Grace, and he's since gone on to do a lot of work with Jeff Buckley's estate, and he oversaw a scrapbook-style book of Jeff's notebooks and diaries back in 2009 called In His Own Voice, which is really wonderful. I think you were referencing some of the diary entries and notebook entries and stuff a little while ago. It's wonderful.
And the rest of him, God, was he handsome and doomed, and God, what a singer. What a singer. What else do we say about young Jeffrey? He had a belly button piercing.
Did he?
Oh, yeah, that's how they identified the body.
That was how they identified the body? I guess, it was several days until...
Yeah, that was they... And, several days in the water. Too much information.
That's one of the... Well, actually, no. Last week we had a few truly TMI moments in the punk stump the buff section involving bodily functions. Well, I think it's about time to dive in. From the deeply fraught family saga at the heart of the music, to the hilarious reason Columbia executives hated the cover, to the hilariously laid-back assembly of the band, and the comparison to Michael Bolton that nearly killed the album before it was completed, here's everything you didn't know about Grace by Jeff Buckley. Well, sadly, folks, the story of Jeff Buckley is yet another entry in TMI's patented guys with complex issues with their dad category. This one's a real doozy. This one makes me sad.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's the dad story in music, right? I mean, not there. I'm sure people had dad issues before him, but it's just like, Murray
Wilson of the Beach Boys?
Yeah, Murray Wilson wasn't also like an incredibly gifted singer-songwriter who literally never met his son, who was also an incredibly gifted singer-songwriter,
Absolutely true. Yeah, Jeff spent much of his life living in the specter of his late father, Tim Buckley, a singer-songwriter of some renown. He was kind of more of a cult figure who's gone on to be sort of a bigger presence in music these days, in a strange sense, basking in the reflected glory of his son. He did have some success in his own time. He performed, I believe, in the final episode of the Monkees TV show, which gets major points with me. It's fitting because his voice is like a more soulful Mickey Dolenz. Right?
Sure.
You're humoring me, and I'll accept it. Yeah, his album Goodbye and Hello on Elektra is probably the best known because it features the song Once I Was, which was included in the movie Coming Home with Bruce Dern and Jane Fonda and Jon Voight. And that's the one, I think this is actually the song plays underneath it. It's the one that ends with Bruce Dern. He's playing a traumatized Vietnam vet, and his character walks into the ocean to die. Spoilers.
Yeah, it's funny this came up because I associate that line so much with Barton Fink because Frasier's dad's character, John Mulaney, is playing like a loose version of William Faulkner.
Oh,
and he says he has like a throwaway line, which might have been improvised, where he's like walking away from these two carrying a ball, and he's like, I'm just gonna walk down to the ocean, and from there I'll improvise. I don't think it's a nod to that movie, but You can cut that.
I think it's a nod to, because wasn't that how Virginia Woolf died? She just filled her pockets with stones, then walked into the lake.
Though.
It was a river.
River, yeah.
Which brings us full circle back to Mr. Buckley. Buckley the Younger, yes. Tim Buckley is a whole other episode unto himself, so we'll go light on Tim's backstory, but he was something of a troubled soul. He has a section on his Wikipedia that's just called the Sex Funk Era. I assume no good can come of that.
Yeah, I mean, I went and looked that up, obviously, and it's got a pretty...
Sure you did.
Yeah, it's got a pretty killer row of LA session guys playing on it, and his cover, Fred Neil's Dolphins, is released on one of those, but yeah.
Tim Buckley left his young wife, Mary Guibert, I think is how you say her name, shortly before their son, Jeff, was born on November 17th, 1966. And for years, Jeff Buckley had no relationship with his biological dad. His mother remarried, and Jeff took his stepfather's surname, and the transformation was complete when he also inexplicably took a new first name, too. I think he went by his middle name. So he was known all growing up in Southern California as Scott Moorhead. Scott Moorhead.
Yeah, I found a quote from him where he said he spent his high school in Anaheim. And he said he was surrounded by the, quote, Disneyland Nazi youth. That just might not be super original, but just still funny and true.
Way with words. Oh, do you think he knew anyone from No Doubt? He was probably 4 or 5 years older, but...
No, he might have known Gwen Stefani's older brother.
Oh, another tragic, unfulfilled talent of...
Yeah,
whoa.
That's a two...
what did they do to the kids in Anaheim in the 70s?
That's a real two roads diverge in a wood moment.
Wow. I'm just picturing young Jeff Buckley and young Gwen Stefani in the shadow of the Matterhorn.
Eric Matthew Stefani, born 1967.
Yeah, basically the same age.
Jeff Buckley, yeah, same age.
That's wild. I do wonder if they knew each other.
Laura High School, noted alumni. Yes, Jeff Buckley.
They
would have been at the same high school at the same time.
Has anyone I need to Google this now.
Jeff Buckley plus Eric Stefani. Yeah, just a Reddit post that says they were classmates.
I'm glad we ended up here. I feel like we've advanced the Jeff Buckley narrative. We don't usually do that. Actually, that's not true. We do that sometimes, but this was a good one. But Jeff's upbringing was really sad because he didn't know his biological father. He would tell the New York Times in 1993, I never knew him. I met him once when I was 8. We went to visit him, and he was working in his room, so I didn't even get to talk to him. And that was it. And then any hopes for reconciliation were dashed 2 months after this first meeting when Tim died of a drug overdose in June of 1975. Tim reportedly died in debt, owning only a guitar and an amplifier. A sobering glimpse into the future for us both. Awful, yes. And the estrangement between father and son continued even into death, as Jeff was not invited to his father's funeral. Horrible. And this loss, understandably, stayed with Jeff. His mother would say in a 2002 BBC4 documentary, he really didn't see himself linked to his father in that way, that somehow he would inherit his father's lifespan. Did we see evidence of him intentionally trying to avoid the same pitfalls? In this case, drugs. Absolutely. Which makes the fact that he followed his father to an early grave all the more tragic. Was that, I think, by all accounts, he wasn't a monk, but I don't think he, got into any kind of hard drugs.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who said, especially in the immediate aftermath of his death, I think his manager has been saying he was acting erratically. And people said that he had been seen stoned, at one point in his life, but... his roadie, who was with him when he drowned, he was like, no, Jeff was not an addict. He may have dabbled as a young man in the music industry in the 90s, but he was by no means an addict the same way his dad was.
But something he and his father did obviously share is music, and Jeff developed an interest for it early on. He said, I was really captured by it, everything about it. It was my mother, it was my father, it was my plaything, it was my toy. It was the best thing in my life. That's a beautiful sentiment for music. How do you feel about that as someone who I assume feels the same way about music?
No, now it's an albatross around my neck, but, It's a great way of describing what it feels like in your teens to
Sure.
discover music, you know?
Jeff enrolled at the Musicians Institute in Los Angeles to study guitar, where he sought to follow in the footsteps not of his father, but of his hero, Jimmy Page.
Yeah, I think we talked about Musicians Institute, but it was basically just where you went to learn how to shred on your respective instrument. It was like a waypoint for a lot of the hair metal guys.
Did Moby go there? I remember it came up recently. Or no, it was Rivers Cuomo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just find this so funny, although I guess you can hear elements of it on Grace. Jeff would play in a series of unsuccessful heavy metal bands in the 80s, where his singing was relegated to backing vocals. I can't believe that.
That's insane, man. I have to think he was just too shy to like unlock his powers. Because I can't imagine anyone being like, yeah, you're the backing vocalist after hearing that.
Yeah, he would have been really young. I mean, if this was like, I saw some posters in that, in the scrapbook we talked about earlier that had posters for gigs in like 83. So he would have been like 17, 18. So, I mean, he's still finding his way. And of course, as he grew interested in music, Jeff fended off the obvious comparisons to his father, Tim. He would later say, I don't hate my father, and I don't resent him existing. It's just something I've grown up with all my life. Not being a part of a life that had so much energy. When you're a kid, people assume you have no mind of your own, which at a very early age I did. It's my way of resisting people's singular vision of my music, by which I think he means just trying to avoid comparisons with his dad. And he would write a diary entry during his European tour in 1995 that elaborated on his very complicated feelings about his dad. He writes, "It's not his memory or his ghost that I despise and avoid. It's the fact that there's a large mass of people in my path, his fans, critics, cultists, editors, and writers of our beloved rock press, my critics, who I've always known to be ahead of me to contrast, compare, and tear me down under the shadow of my father, and sometimes in my father's behalf, as if they have the knowledge and authority. This is something I've known since I was small. I almost just barely touched his life. I was so close, but I lost him. I savor the morsel to this day. The taste is almost gone. I was stuck with his cult, his blurry memory blurred into obscurity ever after by secondhand stories, conjecture, buried jealousies, guilt, secrets, accusations, and so much pain. So much. An ocean of pain." That's his diaries.
Who the writes like that in their diary at 29, you know?
I mean, if they say personality is who you are when no one's watching, and this is who he was in his diary when presumably no one was watching, that's pretty incredible. But like it or not, Jeff Buckley's career would take off thanks in large part to his father, or at least his family name. However, it went down in the most cinematic way possible, which leads me to ask, was there a Jeff Buckley biopic in the works? Like, 'cause this needs to be brought to the big screen. Or it doesn't need to be, but it will be because it's inevitable.
There is one filmed in 2012. Penn Badgley starred as Jeff.
Gossip Girl?
Penn Badgley of You and Gossip Girl, yeah. The movie's called Greetings from Tim Buckley, which sounds confusing. But in 2021, there was another one announced that was done in conjunction with his mother and his estate. So it was going to have all of his songs in it. And the guy from Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark was gonna be in it. And like Hadestown and a bunch of other stuff. He's like a Broadway guy, but no news since then. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how Jeff would actually fit into like the current music biopic timbre, you know? I mean, they just put out Amy, but like they haven't done, despite all the Zoomers dressing like it's like the mid to late 90s, like they haven't done a grunge biopic, you know? I think the closest thing is that depressing Gus Van Sant movie called like Last Days.
Oh yeah.
But like, where's our Lane Staley biopic? Where's our Jeff Buckley biopic? You know, where's the guy from Mother Love Bone who died and inspired Temple of the Dog? They had so many terrible band names back then. Was that Mother Love Bone?
Yeah.
Andrew Wood.
Wood. Yeah.
It's gotta suck to just have like, I don't know, if there's an afterlife, I would be pretty pissed off if like I had never achieved anything and then two vastly more talented of my buddies came out and made one of the all-time grunge bangers just because I died. I'm referring, of course, to Hunger Strike.
If there's an afterlife, it's got to suck to watch a subpar movie biopic being made of your life.
That's also true. Yeah.
Wasn't Franco going to play him?
I don't remember that, but why not?
Yeah. Well, back to happier topics, Jeff Buckley's musical ascent. In the spring of 1991, friends and admirers of Tim Buckley were putting together a tribute show at St. Anne's Church in Brooklyn. Jeff was initially not invited, just as he was not invited to his funeral, since Tim's obituaries had failed to mention him. And Tim likely didn't tell his friends that he had a biological son either. So as a result, most of Tim's friends and associates didn't even realize that Jeff existed. 20th century parenting, or fatherhood, I should say.
That's crushing.
Yeah, I know. But Tim's former manager, a guy by the name of Herb Cohen, belatedly informed the organizers of the Junior Buckley's existence and his talent, and an invitation was extended to him to perform. Jeff was understandably a little skeptical about performing a concert that he initially wasn't invited to, but he ultimately accepted. He hoped that the concert would help him process his unresolved feelings for his dad and purge the grief that he'd stored up for his entire life. He told Rolling Stone in 1994, "It bothered me that I hadn't been to his funeral, that I'd never been able to tell him anything. I used that show to pay my last respects." And the show was scheduled for April 26th, 1991. And first-hand reports indicate that the show got off to a slow start with a bunch of tedious numbers by downtown musicians like Richard Heigl, Eric Anderson, and the Shams. One of the attendees would tell the aforementioned author David Brown that the setlist consisted of, quote, avant-garde versions of stuff that was avant-garde to begin with. At times it was pretty painful. It was not an easygoing concert.
Yeah, I mean, it was produced by Hal Wilner, right? Do you know about him?
A little bit.
Hal Wilner is really incredible. I mean, he kind of had a job that doesn't really exist anymore. Where he was just like, would put together a bunch of these incredible tribute albums. You know, I mean, he was a producer. He produced for Marianne Faithfull, Lou Reed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but he would do these insane concept albums. Like he did a tribute to Thelonious Monk that has like Dr. John on there. He has one to Kurt Weill. He has one from that's just about Disney that has like Disney songs covered by like Sun Ra. You know, Nino Rota. He has a whole one for Italian composer Nino Rota, famous for the Godfather theme and Fellini films.
Stormy Weather, the music of Harold Arlen. Wow.
Has one for Mingus. The one that's really interesting is Rogues Gallery.
I was just looking at that.
It's pretty great. It's a bunch of like old pirate and like nautical songs. So if you've ever wanted to hear, I think Tom Waits and Keith Richards do Shenandoah. Mm-hmm. It's pretty great. He just had juice. I mean, he like knew everyone and would be like, why don't you, like Brian Ferry, you know, Nick Cave, come in and sing a pirate song, and they would. Sting, come sing a pirate song. Bono, like it's nuts.
So, okay, this Hal Wilner guy puts together some incredible concept albums for, you know, tribute albums and tribute shows, but some of them are a little granular, a little not for mass consumption. So this was not an easygoing concert. But then the atmosphere changes. The lights go down. Jeff Buckley takes the stage. No one knows who he is. His back is to the audience. He's furiously strumming his guitar, and then he starts to sing. And now, as we said, most people didn't even realize that Tim Buckley had a son. And so now here they were, gathered at this tribute concert at a church, and some guy comes onto the stage, and they can't even see his face, and he starts singing in this incredibly similar voice, but better?
Yes.
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 The effect was incredibly eerie. And also, the song choice was very, very poignant. Jeff performed Tim's song, "I Never Asked to Be Your Mountain." And this is one of Tim's most personal songs. It was basically a kiss-off to his wife and the infant son that he was leaving behind. Buckley was singing the tune of his own abandonment to fans of the father that he never knew. It's heartbreaking, it's terrible, it's cathartic. There's just so much wrapped up in this. And the song, I don't know if you know it, it's one of my favorite it is my favorite Tim Buckley song. It builds in intensity like a runaway train. It just gets so frantic.
I never asked to be your mountain. told me of his life. You didn't understand my love. You don't know why I tried. And the rain is falling on my head. I'm dying the reason why.
Midway through the song, the stage lights are switched on, illuminating Jeff's face for the first time, casting his silhouette onto the back wall very dramatically. This all made a huge impact. Although, hilariously, Jeff himself did not appreciate this nod to the theatrical. As he told a friend after the show, "My God, I stepped on stage and they backlit it. It was like the second coming."
He's admirably self-aware about like his looks and the way that people tried to capitalize it on it, or just this like flair for the dramatic that people had when it came to his image.
And his father, yeah.
Yeah.
But for most of the audience, this essentially was the second coming. One person in the audience told the New York Times, "Everyone was there to celebrate the music of Tim Buckley, and here was someone who looked like him, sounded like him, and had the same vocal range. It was very spooky, but impressive." And Jeff later returned that night to perform more songs, backed by former Captain Beefheart guitarist Gary Lucas, who played the songs Sephironia, The King's Chain, and, don't make me say this, Phantasmagoria in 2. But the finale featured Jeff alone with an acoustic guitar singing Once I Was, one of his father's best-known songs, probably the best-known song by his father. As he told Musician Magazine in 1994, "It was the first song my mother ever played me by Tim." Like how he calls his dad Tim. "So I learned it. It was hard to learn it. I couldn't really do a full version of it at home without crying. I almost cried on stage. I broke a string on stage at the end of that song. They were brand new strings. I was really pissed." So minus a guitar, Jeff sang the last lines a cappella. "And sometimes I wonder for a while, do you ever remember me?"
For the days when we smiled, and the hours that ran wild, and the magic of our eyes, and the silence of our world. And sometimes I wonder for a while, do you ever remember me?
And the words hung in the air like a bruising indictment from a lost child to an absent father. And the audience burst into applause and probably tears. It's a slight exaggeration to say that the performance made him an overnight star, but not far off. The aforementioned Hal Wilner, who produced the concert, would later say, "Over the course of that one show, Jeff had been accepted by almost every musical grouping in New York. Everyone had just adopted him, and it became a natural thing for him to want to come here. It's like he stepped into a new life," because remember, he'd flown in from California to play this show. Those in attendance at the tribute show recall this swarm of people rushing up to Jeff to get near him. Musicians and industry figures would hand him cards, and women flocked to him to offer him a shoulder to cry on, shall we say. And within weeks, he'd relocated to New York City full-time.
Back when you could do it.
Yeah. But this decision to pursue a new life would leave Jeff uneasy. As he later told the Philadelphia Inquirer, "In a way, I sacrificed my anonymity for my father, whereas he sacrificed me for his fame. So I guess I made a mistake." Jesus.
Yeah, man, he had a lot going on under the hood.
Yeah.
You know, what does it mean when to say a man has a lot going on? Jeff Buckley. As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages.
Well, the most immediate partnership to emerge from this tribute show was with his guitar accompanist, the aforementioned Gary Lucas. Formerly of Captain Beefheart, Lucas had a band horrifically called Gods and Monsters. That's terrible.
Oh, you're showing your ass here. Gods and Monsters is a line from Bride of Frankenstein.
No, I know what it is. I still think it's a terrible name.
Have you seen the movie Gods and Monsters?
That was a book too, right?
Yeah, it's about James Whale. I mean, Bride of Frankenstein is so fascinating because it's like the gayest thing that ever came out of Universal. And James Whale was the director. And, he had a interesting career. He made a lot of classic horrors. He made the first Frankenstein. He made The Old Dark House. He, obviously Bride. He did The Invisible Man. And he was, I believe, he was openly gay, which is insane for the 20s and 30s. And so the movie Gods and Monsters stars, I want to say, Ian McKellen and Brendan Fraser. And it is, it's about his later life, and it's quite good. So, shut up about your terrible name. Gods and Monsters is a sick name.
All right, fine. Well, Gary Lucas invited Jeff Buckley to join Gods and Monsters in the spring of 1991, shortly after the tribute show to Jeff's father. And it was this early union that yielded early versions of the title track to Grace and also Mojo Pin. I think two of my least favorite songs on the album. I'm sorry, I sound like I have it in for Gary Lucas. I don't. Lucas recalled in an interview with Song Facts, I invited him into my group. Right away, I thought he could be the great singer I've been looking for. He said he would do it. One thing led to another, and he was in. Then I needed to write some music, and I came up with Grace and Mojo Pin as instrumental guitar pieces. I sent them to him, and he had perfect lyrics and a perfect melody for each instrumental. The words to Grace apparently came from saying goodbye to his new girlfriend, Rebecca Moore, one rainy afternoon at the airport. Like Lucas, Jeff had met her during rehearsals for the Tim Buckley tribute show, where Moore, who's the daughter of avant-garde photographer Peter Moore, was setting up a buffet for the performers. That's cute. I like that. That's a good meet cute. I was playing at a tribute show for my late father I'd never met, and she was setting up the buffet backstage. Could we get someone on the line for that? Jamie?
About the buffet? What was the buffet? Oh, you want to do a rom-com of this meeting. Okay.
Yeah.
I understand. I thought you were going to be like, can we find out what the catering was? And I was going to say probably a bunch of really overdone chicken piccata would be like the main thing.
Think about it. The only two MCU, DCU genres that are making any money right now, music biopics and rom-coms. You put them together. I'm such a great
slut. Dude. First of all, horror is making a ton of money right now, as it always does. That Longlegs movie that they've been made like $23 million in one weekend. And the budget was 10, including marketing.
Wow.
Horror never loses. Bet the farm on horror. Sorry. Anyway, this bit that you're doing, it has legs, but except for the fact that all of his saddest songs are also written about her.
I mean, like the great man once said, it'd be like that sometimes.
Fair.
Can I say that?
Yeah.
I can say that? Okay.
Yeah. It do be like that.
So yes, the words to the title track of Grace came from saying goodbye to his new girlfriend at the airport in New York as he was flying back to California to basically wrap up his affairs there and relocate to New York full time. And he was on the flight, flying back home for the last time to basically say goodbye, and that's where all these words would come from. He would later explain, Grace is just about life sometimes being so long, which is a sad thing to hear him say. Considering he died at 30. At the time, I was anticipating leaving Los Angeles for New York, so I was waiting to go. I'm not afraid to go. I'm not afraid to die. I'm not afraid to go away from this place or from any place, but it just goes so slow. And I had somebody who loved me in New York a lot, and it was amazing. Poignant.
Ouch.
Yeah, that hurt. Yeah. Both Grace and Mojo Pin were songs that Jeff performed frequently during his brief tenure in Gods and Monsters. And he took the songs with them following their last gig together in March 1992. But rest assured, folks, Jeff Buckley and Gary Lucas stayed friendly after their band split, and Jeff invited him into the studio during sessions for Grace to contribute to the tracks that he co-wrote. And in Grace's liner notes, Gary Lucas is credited with, quote, magical guitarness. Jeff's skill with words deserted him there.
Be nice to him. He died. Died as he lived, handsomely. So it wasn't long after Jeff left Gods and Monsters that he made his debut at the Cine. We're calling it Cine, right?
I'm going to say Cine. I'm sorry to our Irish friends out there.
Yeah. I think it is Shine because of Sinead, but who's to say? An Irish person would be the person.
I'm going to text somebody right now, actually.
It comes from some idiomatic phrase.
What's it mean?
The full phrase is Shine and re. That it means that is to say.
In other
So
words.
it's just like, yeah.
By the same
Let's
token.
see. Here it is. Here it is in an Ulster dialect, Shine, and a Connacht dialect, it's Shine, and in Munster dialect, it's all the same. It's Shine. It wasn't long after Jeff left Gods and Monsters that he made his debut at the Shine, which is Gaelically named East Village. I don't think they call it Gaelic anymore. I think they just
Gaelically
call
named.
it Irish.
Yeah.
Anyway, the proprietor is Irish. He named after it's a word in Gaelic or Irish. Please don't cancel us. I love the Irish.
It's our friend Sarah. Our friend Sarah, who's a listener of Team I, she's from Dublin, I believe.
Oh, wonderful.
Hi, Sarah.
An East Village coffee shop and club that became his basically incubator for this time period. You compared it to the Beatles' famous Hamburg period. He got his 10,000 hours here. Actually, if he went to Musicians Institute, he definitely got his 10,000 hours there. But
Yep.
And I haven't heard him sing at that concert, but presumably his voice was amazing there. But what's great about the Shine period is that we have so much of it. We have like 34 tracks that have been released, and probably more, honestly. But, you know, it was a humble abode. It had scuffed wooden floors and chipped brick walls. The club's owner was an Irish expat named Shane Doyle, and he would later recall in the documentary You and I, my memory is he just kind of, how offensive of an Irish accent do you think I should do?
Oh, go for it. Just go for it. We've already butchered the language. You might as well go.
I'm not going to do it. My memory is he just kind of ambled into the place, dragging his guitar in the middle of the day with his head half down. He handed me this tape with some paper wrapped around it and said he wanted to play. Buckley's tape went down well enough to earn him a regular spot on Monday nights, one of the deadest nights in the entertainment industry.
So maybe the tape wasn't that great.
Yeah, I was going to say. He had borrowed a Telecaster, a blonde one, from Janine Nichols, who was one of the people who helped put on the concerts at St. Anne's. And he was, as we talked about at the top of the episode, I don't know how much you're going to keep that, but as we talked about at the top of the episode, the Shine stuff is just amazing for his breathtaking musical influences. I mean, he plays everything from Edith Piaf to Billie Holiday to Judy Garland, deep cuts from Van Morrison, Joni Mitchell, Elton John, punk acts like Bad Brains and the MC5. He told Rolling Stone in 1994, "I became a human jukebox, learning all these songs I'd always known, discovering the basics of what I do." Shane Doyle, though, put it a little less poetically. He did whatever he wanted. He might play for half an hour, then he might drink some wine and get up and he'd play some more. It was his night. That's the way it was. He was experimenting, and it was an opportunity to do that in front of a very friendly audience. And if he made mistakes, he had fun with that. So the place served him very well in that way. And I mean, you know, it's impossible to pin down the chronology of his practice routine, right? But like Buckley's voice at live at Shine is otherworldly. I mean, he's a 4-octave vocal range.
That's nuts.
It is.
I mean there's like a short list of people who have 4 octaves, right?
Yeah, 3 is pushing it. I mean, he's basically a lyric tenor in his chest voice, which is the same range as Pavarotti. And then with his falsetto, somebody's pinned all the notes of his range actually on there, but it's high, and he could go deep as well. 4 octaves is a lot, especially the control he has over it. I mean, like once you start getting up into your falsetto range or your belt range, there's like you sacrifice control for some of those notes, but not him.
Just some other people who have 4-octave ranges. Apparently, Ariana Grande, which scans. Paul McCartney,
Yes.
which though I love him with every fiber of my being, that kind of surprises me. Although, I mean,
I'm going to go ahead and say that they're counting his like woos as part of that.
maybe.
I don't think he has I've certainly never heard him span that much like impressively. I'm like maybe some of the high notes and screams he does in like "Oh Darling" or
Golden Slumbers.
yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
Haley Williams, Christina Aguilera, Prince. Oh, Prince, that makes sense.
yeah,
Michael Jackson also makes sense. Freddie Mercury makes a ton of sense.
yeah.
Whitney Houston, yeah.
Yeah.
Mariah Carey, of course, yeah.
Point is, he's in rarefied company.
Yes, Bruce Dickinson, Kate Bush.
That's so good. You mentioned this at the top of the episode, but one of the things I find most fascinating about Jeff Buckley is his love of a specific singer in the Qawwali tradition. I'm probably butchering that. It is Sufi devotional music. And the guy he was obsessed with was Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. He's from Pakistan. And to the point where he interviewed him for Interview Magazine, and he would later write a set of liner notes for Khan. They became friends. There's like photos of them together and stuff.
Aww.
But Khan is like widely considered like the greatest of all time in this tradition, and his ability to spin endless variations of melodic phrases off at the top of his range, and his range, dexterity, and agility are just like unparalleled. I mean, it's kind of a hard sell for Western audiences because his timbre is very harsh and scratchy, but it is just insane what he's able to do with his voice. And Buckley was obsessed with him, and he covers one of his songs. Yeah, I'm not even going to pronounce it. He performs one of Khan's songs, and that one's released on Shanae, and that's a 6-minute version. But there are reports of him doing 20-minute versions of these songs.
Wow.
There's a quote from Chris Cornell that I was looking for, and I haven't been able to find. But he talks about like. He was like, Jeff had this fearlessness with his falsetto range, which was like, could be considered like an archetypally feminine thing or whatever. And so he talks about like Jeff just spending like 15 or 20 minutes doing these Qawwali style a cappella runs in Shanae in front of like 90s East Village, like punk grunge bikers guys, and just like having the place like quiet, of just people being like, what is happening? This is incredible. It's insane. Anyway, it was an extremely laid-back environment. There was no formal stage, so Buckley just sat in a corner and played. And, it was a hard road upwards because those are not fun gigs. People don't really care. He would later recall, it wasn't easy at first. I mean, when I first walked into Shanae or the Cornelia Street Cafe, people talked their asses off. They didn't want to hear it. And then, funnily enough, even when they did listen, his songs were frequently drowned out by the buzz of a cappuccino machine that he would later learn to mimic with impressive accuracy. But don't start ringing the sad bells for Jeff, because he also used to wash the dishes at these places. A former server named Tia Biasi says in the You and I documentary, Jeff would come in at 2 o'clock in the morning. The music would be over, and we'd be kind of cleaning up. He would just, need to clear his head, and he would kick me out of the way and start washing dishes. He loved to wash the dishes. We loved to let him wash the dishes. I'm going to reproduce this in your exact writing because I love this. Before long, though, this is when
the music
turns different in the behind the music, and the guy says, "But before long, the buzz of the cappuccino machine had turned into metaphorical buzz, and as spring turned to summer in 1991, Shanae attracted hordes of people to hear Jeff sing. Soon, the street outside was packed with limos carrying major label execs who just had to check this guy out for themselves." On one memorable night, Clive Davis, Seymour Stein, and Don Einer were all crammed into the tiny venue. Jordan, do you want to run down why those people are important?
Clive Davis, head of Columbia for a million years, champion of, Jesus, it's like almost easier to name the people that he didn't sign. Janis Joplin, Bruce Springsteen, Billy Joel. Earth, Wind and Fire, Whitney Houston when he founded Arista Records, Alicia Keys, Kelly Clarkson. I mean, yeah, too many. He's the guy. And he recently appeared on an episode of the Paul Anka Talk show Our Way that I produce. He was last week's guest. Check it out, folks. Seymour Stein is the president and I believe founder of Sire Records. Who's all on Sire? I only know the punk names.
Oh, I mean,
Ramones.
he signed the Ramones. Yeah. Madonna would put out some stuff on Sire. I think Talking Heads, like a lot of or Blondie. I think it was Blondie is the most famous one.
And Don Einer, I think he was the president of Sony, I believe. I mean, he's big, all heavy dudes.
Buckley eventually went with Columbia Records. Like Billy Joel, he was swayed by the fact that Bob Dylan was on the label, as was Bruce Springsteen and Leonard Cohen. He signed in October of 1992 and used some of his advance to pay his grandmother back money he owed her. He sent her a letter along with it writing, "I only thank the angels I could ever send this check," and then wrote a lengthy paragraph that consists almost entirely of the words, "I love you." A year after signing, Columbia would issue his first commercial recording, the 4-song Live at Chennai, which has since been expanded to like 34 tracks. And apparently the label is still in the Columbia vaults, are his like, have you heard the Springsteen Hammond sessions where he's just playing like stuff like Mary Queen of Arkansas on acoustic guitar and just his voice? Yeah, those are good. They're on one of the big box sets, but there's apparently in the Columbia vaults like 3 days worth of recording of Buckley running through his entire solo repertoire on guitar, keys, harmonium at one point, which is hilarious and weird.
Well, that's what they use on Lover You Should Have Come Over too, right? Isn't that the first sound you hear?
Yes. This was for an engineer and a Columbia A&R rep named Steve Berkowitz. So there's 3 days worth of Buckley professional studio stuff that is still in the Columbia vaults, which I find amazing.
Yeah, Steve Berkowitz comes up a lot in this episode. For his follow-up to the Live at Chennai EP, the debut LP that would become Grace, Buckley decided to assemble a band. He didn't want to go the acoustic route. As soon as the EP came out, I was dying to be with a band, he later said. I was dying for the relationship, for the chemistry. People, the warm bodies, male or female, bass, drums, dulcimer, tuba, anything. Any way that the band would work out. I love it. I love the enthusiasm. Unfortunately, Jeff didn't work out the specifics of this band until weeks before the sessions were due to begin in September 1993. The band thing was a total unknown, Grace producer Andy Wallace says in David Brown's book Dream Brother, The Lives and Music of Jeff and Tim Buckley. He didn't have a band. The label executives were getting understandably anxious, and Jeff did everything he could to keep them at arm's length. This didn't really go well.
One thing execs don't like.
Yeah. He told Juice magazine in 1996, rather than have anybody pick my band, I decided to stall until I found the right people. So I stalled and I lied. Nothing was really happening because I hadn't found anybody. But gradually an ad hoc group began to coalesce. He met bassist Mick Grondal after a gig inside a crypt at Columbia University that summer.
Just leave that one there.
As one does, yes. Drummer Matt Johnson came at the recommendation of his girlfriend, Rebecca Moore. Jeff didn't know him, but he left a message on his answering machine. He's cold calling a drummer. He's new to New York, I guess. And later on in the sessions, Jeff would thicken his guitar parts with help from Michael Tingay, I think is how you say it, a 21-year-old friend of his girlfriend's who'd had more training as an actor than as a musician. And in fact, he barely played music outside of high school jam sessions, and he didn't even own a guitar strap. Well, before long, Jeff and his rhythm section, minus the other guitarists, were jamming at Jeff's rehearsal space. And it all seemed very loose until Jeff dropped the bomb on these guys that he had a deal with Columbia and was due to record his debut album soon. These guys had no idea. I think they thought they were just jamming with their new friend. Drummer Matt Johnson would recall, within a few weeks, we were recording a record, so it was very quick. Very shocking to go from meeting someone and playing with them to recording in about 2 or 3 weeks. It was really scary. Jeff's producer, Andy Wallace, who would oversee the Grace sessions, was also scared. He attended one of the group's East Village rehearsals and was not thrilled with what he heard. He would say they would start a riff that would turn into a jam, eventually abandon the riff, and then it would go on for 10 minutes. It was interesting, but my impression was, wait a minute, I thought you guys were learning songs. We've got studio time booked. And just 6 weeks after his band's first rehearsal, Jeff and his rhythm section were due in Bearsville Studios, 90 miles north of Manhattan, in the rural artist enclave of Woodstock, New York. They planned to meet at Jeff's East Village apartment on the morning of September 20th and carpool up together, but they were running behind. Jeff left a message on his girlfriend's answering machine. It's 12:30 and nobody in the band is ready, of course. Eventually, the rhythm section finally arrived, and together they set off on the 2-mile trek to Bearsville. And the sessions had a promising start. The aforementioned Columbia A&R man Steve Berkowitz would describe the first weeks as, quote, a volcanic eruption of artistry from Jeff. He was fond of trying endless arrangements of his songs. Berkowitz would say it was hundreds of ideas and guitar parts and vocal parts and backwards parts and extra drum parts.
Yeah, Andy Wallace would tell Tape Op that the biggest challenge of the record was just keeping Jeff focused. He said he had so many ideas. He was so diverse. The album, though, never would have gotten done if he didn't have someone there to pull the reins in. So they did 2.5 to 3 months at Bearsville, and then Jeff went out to L.A. for a while and worked on some more songs after he came back from L.A. So all told, Wallace said they probably spent about 6 months on Grace.
For a debut, that's a lot.
It is, yeah. I mean, it just kind of shows, I guess, the high hopes that they had for him and the major label budget in the
yeah.
the mid-90s. Ugh.
The in-studio experimentation sounds like a special sort of torture for his extremely green band, but also for Jeff himself. The thought of capturing the, quote, definitive version of his songs was deeply at odds with his spontaneous personality, not to mention his perfectionist tendencies. He would say while promoting Grace, the nature of recording is excruciating. It's obsessive because you're dealing with ultimate things. It's not like a live show where you play and it just disappears into the air like smoke. It's like painting, sound painting. It's in a crystallized form, so it's very nerve-wracking. Which brain cell do I put down here forever and ever? And this makes me so sad. His anxiety was kicked into overdrive following what we'll refer to as the Michael Bolton incident. Were you familiar with the Michael Bolton incident?
Not before reading this, but totally understandable.
Yes. Jeff read a review of the Live at Cine EP in Newsday, and it unfavorably compared it to Michael Bolton's latest album. The two releases were paired together with the phrase, two white vocalists with affecting voices drawn directly from black idiom. The critic wrote that, quote, both Jeff Buckley and Michael Bolton awkwardly reach for a balance of emotion and technique, eventually relying on sheer voice of will over singing and flaking out. How do you feel about that?
That critic should be fired. I mean, yes, Jeff Buckley does have a large amount of songs by black artists in his repertoire, but a lot of them are women, actually.
It's okay to rip women off.
No, but it's a little more forward-thinking than Bolton. And also, they don't have the same voice. Michael Bolton's whole thing is like heroically straining, so he sounds like he's having a hernia. He has like absolutely zero of Buckley's ability to invent and utilize his voice.
Both former metal guys.
Yeah. But no, that's a stupid, facile comparison, and I want to find out who did it and yell at them.
I left it out of a lot of what I'm citing in this episode is from a deep dive I did for Rolling Stone into the making of Grace. Yeah. I'm telling them.
Well, don't do that.
Well, no, in case somebody from Rolling Stone hears and catches me.
Is a review in Newsday.
Yes. I left the name of the person out of that, and I'm wondering if I did that for reasons of diplomacy, so it might have been a semi-famous writer.
Well, that's a stupid thing that they said, so...
Yeah.
New York Newsday review by Charles Aaron. This is a savage review. He calls Buckley a rising alterna hunk. They shamelessly appeal to their audiences. Buckley wailing and scatting folky blues for wounded bohemians. While Bolton succeeds feebly on a grand stage, and Buckley fails grandly on a small stage, he's a leather-lunged Loudon Rainwhite, a slacker Robert Plant, a loopy chanson, and finally a hyper jazzbo, using his voice to mimic his guitar's wail, a horn solo, the ghost of Van Morrison. In fact, he does everything short of human beatboxing, and he does it passionately. Wow. You, Charles Aaron.
But this critique sent Jeff into a tailspin, and he reportedly postponed work on Grace for 2 whole days while he pondered this criticism. According to producer Andy Wallace, Jeff was almost apoplectic over the review. It stopped him cold, he says in Dream Brother. If somebody had thought, who can I use to really get his goat, you couldn't have chosen somebody better than Michael Bolton. Jeff was clearly still bothered by it months later when he sat for a Q&A with Interview magazine. When they asked him about the review, he said, "That's really disgusting. The thing is, I'm not taking from that tradition. I don't want to be black. Michael Bolton desperately wants to be black. He also sucks." His words, not mine, but also mine. And also Heigl's.
But I think that's correct. Like, I think it's too, he's too eclectic to be tarred with this brush of like, I want to be black. Like, he also wants to be Pakistani. He also wants to be, if you're taking his absorption of these styles as just reducing it down to, I want to be X, that's false. That's stupid. Like, you take all of those influences and you put out something, and the guy died before you could put out, like, half his corpus is covers. So,
I mean, it would be like if, John Lennon and Paul McCartney died, mid 1963 when they had one LP complete and half of, their second one done. It was either recordings done from clubs, which were mostly covers, or Please Please Me, their first album, which was, probably half covers. It's not a fair assessment. But in a hilarious/poignant coda, years later when Jeff was working on his intended follow-up to Grace, he surprised friends by buying a pile of cheap cassettes from a street vendor in Memphis. And this pile of tapes included the dreaded Michael Bolton. When they asked him why he just bought some Michael Bolton cassettes, he replied, "Do you know how much blank tape is? I just got 10 tapes to record on." And so then after Jeff died and friends were combing through his demos, they were amused to find that his musical fragments were interspersed with Michael Bolton power ballads.
that must be a truly dizzying experience.
Yes.
Now we have to talk, of course, about Hallelujah, the track on Grace that everyone knows. Jeff didn't think he had enough strong original material to fill a full album. And so instead, he revisited his days as a, quote, human jukebox at Shiny and culled through his formidable repertoire of cover songs. But don't call them cover songs, which is exactly what I said earlier, said Columbia A&R man Steve Berkowitz. Jeff didn't play cover songs, he explained in a 2016 interview with Uncut. He played other people's compositions and made them his own. He consumed the idea and the feel. He really was a blues singer, I think. He had that religious depth of feeling that blues music has, or that Billie Holiday had. Billie Holiday is obviously tremendous, but I would honestly compare him more to Ella Fitzgerald. Like,
why is that?
In the ability, just the ability to extemporaneize and with, because Billie Holiday, like, God bless her, I don't think she was known as an especially agile vocalist because, since her first recordings were with big bands, they didn't really have a ton of opportunity for vocalists to just step out in front and wail or like scat, do extended. And then by the time she had stopped doing that and was recording in like, you think of her later period where like some of the stuff is recorded with the Ray Ellis Orchestra and her voice straight up sounds like garbage, but she's able to impart such feeling and beauty in these phrases. Whereas people like Ella and Sarah Vaughan are just like insane virtuosos with their voice. And I think Jeff falls more into that. But anyway, it's just me on other people's takes. I understand why people hate me. Grace contains 3 cover songs, which Jeff curated to show off his multiple musical moods. Great alliteration.
Nice.
There's Lilac Wine, a jazz standard recorded by the likes of Eartha Kitt, and Buckley's version is based on Nina Simone's. He does an unerringly good version of Nina Simone's "Be My Husband" at Chennai. He also performs the Benjamin Britten arrangement of the Middle English hymnal Corpus Christi Carol. And then, of course, there's his interpretation of Leonard Cohen's epic Hallelujah. He'd first heard the song while house-sitting for the aforementioned Janine Nichols, who had loaned him the guitar that he recorded this on and was program director at St. Anne's Church. And she got a thanks in the liner notes to Live at Chennai for her efforts. So he was staying at her apartment in Park Slope and taking care of her cat. He came across a copy of the Leonard Cohen tribute album that Hal Wilner had produced called I'm Your Fan. And he especially liked John Cale's reworking of Hallelujah. Jeff was not familiar with the original. And this is important because Cale's version differs greatly from Cohen's dirge-like original. Leonard Cohen's original for this has like 80 verses that he whittled down and would interchange, I guess, however he was feeling. And when Cale went to cover it, he recalled later that he was watching his fax machine with a sort of bemused stare because more and more just kept coming. All 80 verses came out, taking up 15 pages.
Well, because didn't he ask Cohen to like send? He's like, yeah, can you send me the lyrics?
Can you fax me the lyrics?
And then
Yeah.
there's a great book by the wonderful music journalist Alan Light called "The Holy or the Broken: Leonard Cohen, Jeff Buckley, and the Unlikely Ascent of Hallelujah," which is just all about the long, storied history of this song, and it's a really cool book.
When did that come out?
Fairly recent. I think they're making a documentary of it too. Oh, 2013. 2013.
Buckley revisited this song frequently during his sessions for Grace. He recorded over 20 takes of it. And Andy Wallace would later say, there was never any question about this one going on the album. It was something special. It had a magic to it. And that was there from the beginning. The finished recording was actually comps from a bunch of different takes, which I think is interesting because it sounds so seamless.
Yeah.
It really sounds like it's done live. His guitar playing is so beautiful on there, the finger picking. It's Jeff's song. It's not anyone else's song anymore. It's Jeff's song now. It has 365 million streams on Spotify, and the runner-up, Lover You Should Have Come Over, has a third of that. However, Rolling Stone was not impressed. In her review of Grace, critic Stephanie Zacharek writes that the young Buckley's vocals don't always stand up. He doesn't sound battered or desperate enough to carry off Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. Yeah, you idiot. He sounds like a goddamn angel. He holds one of those falsetto notes for something like 23 seconds.
Jesus.
I can't imagine anyone listening to that and be like, no. Yeah, what the f*** were these people? Why did we give them... Music criticism was a mistake. These people never should have had this much power.
I mean, here's an unfair question, and there is no right or wrong answer to this. How much of this feeling is, now that Jeff is literally an angel, we imbue this song with a certain significance that it maybe didn't have in 1994?
No, I disagree. I mean, just from... obviously I'm biased, but like I cannot understand how someone heard that recording and went, like that is really mind-boggling. It's an astounding vocal performance. The guitar playing is beautiful. No, I mean, yes, obviously it has added resonance now because he died, but contemporaneously for someone to listen to be that and be like mid, stupid.
It is interesting to me though. I'm hard pressed to name a song that's not just like a jazz standard or something that has so many. I mean, obviously, I think Buckley's version is the one that triumphs over all of them. But I mean,
yeah,
so many extremely well-known versions, from Leonard Cohen to John Cale's version to Jeff Buckley's version to Rufus Wainwright's version, which I think in some circles is probably the most famous of all of them. I mean, that's kind of. I mean, I guess that's why. But
Rufus Wainwright is just doing the Cale version from his live record, Fragments of a Rainy Season. I mean, it's just that's the most straightforward possible cover.
No, yeah, you're right, but I just think it's interesting that I can't think of a non-standard that has had, so many lives. I mean, I guess that's why Alan wrote that book about it and they're doing a documentary about it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it regularly climbs I mean, now that singing competitions aren't really a thing anymore, but it would regularly, climb back up the charts whenever somebody would do it there. I mean, Justin Timberlake covered it at, I think, a charity thing.
Furiously Googles.
Yeah, it's weird. It didn't really escape containment until Shrek. And it's funny because I think this is one of those weird instances where Cale is singing it in the movie, but the soundtrack had so that's a weirder thing too.
Is there another big cover that Katie Lang did a big version, Pentatonics.
Ugh, that sounds awful. That I would rather kill myself than listen to an a cappella group do a version of that song, especially an a cappella group that's so self-consciously virtuosic. Ugh.
That's my bleepo.
In 2009, Cohen said, I think it's a good song, but I think too many people sing it.
Says the man, I would assume, earning checks every time somebody sings it.
Yeah, well, he's not earning anything anymore, but Yeah, Timberlake performed it during the Hope for Haiti Now telethon, which wasn't this.
Oh, it was the one that Wyclef Jean
Yeah, this was later
defrauded.
believed to be an enormous defrauded situation by Wyclef Jean.
Allegedly,
Hilarious.
for legal reasons, etc.
No, I think he was actually convicted. I don't think we have to say that anymore. They sang it after Sandy Hook. Boy, Jesus Christ. This is going to make me have a stroke.
Uh-oh.
Adam Sandler performed an off-color parody of Hallelujah at Madison Square Garden as part of the concert for Hurricane Sandy relief, with Paul Schaefer on piano. Sandler's version contained numerous references to Hurricane Sandy and contemporary events in local culture, sports, and politics.
And there was also the Saturday Night Live cold open after the 2016 election with
Kate McKinnon is Hillary singing it.
Yes.
Aw, man, Linkin Park frontman Chester Bennington sang Hallelujah at Chris Cornell's funeral in Hollywood Forever.
Did they die the same year, 2017?
I think so.
Chris was 2017.
Bennington was July and Cornell was
May.
Yeah, so like 2 months afterwards. And they were friends. I know they talked a lot about this kind of stuff, but that is tough.
Hallelujah.
Oh man, Adam Sandler has to answer for that.
Do you want to elaborate?
For turning it into a parody song about Hurricane Sandy? Like, good Lord. I'm not like
How do you turn something into a parody song about a disaster? That's the thing I don't understand.
I'm gonna let you
and the listeners
that.
discover. No, it's all right.
I will never listen to that. I hate Adam Sandler. Red Letter Media did this whole breakdown about Jack and Jill, about how his movies are probably not money laundering, but basically embezzlement schemes, because they look so shitty and they're shot so poorly and so badly, and they have these enormous budgets that he has got to be pocketing way more than his quote-unquote nominal fee for it, because it's all through his production company.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and also like he puts out like a movie every like 4 years that people have to obligatorily be like, well, actually Adam Sandler's a good actor. Have you seen Uncut Gems? And I want to scream.
It was a good movie.
We used to let white people go so far on making goofy voices. Like it was so easy for them. Mike Myers, Adam Sandler, Jim Gaffigan. Like, it was just, you had to have like 2 funny voices, or in Sandler's case, 1 in your arsenal, and people would just bark like seals at you and throw millions at you.
What's the funny voice?
I mean, even on SNL, like none of his characters, like maybe Opera Man or like Cajun Man, but none of those like escaped containment. In all of his movies, he only did that stupid voice. And everyone was like, my God, comic mastermind of the 90s.
Can I tell you a secret? I knew the silly voice. I just wanted to hear you do it.
Oh, you son of a bitch.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
So that is the extremely abbreviated story of Hallelujah. For more, check out
Heigl's blinding rage towards it.
Not towards it. I assume.
Oh no, not towards the song.
Yeah.
No, the song is innocent.
Yeah. Except for the Leonard Cohen version. That's a tough listen.
It is.
Yeah.
His affair with synthesizers was really a tragic one.
Yeah. How long is his version? Is it like, because he didn't sing like 80 verses, did he?
That's a good question.
No, yeah, it's only 4 minutes 39 seconds. So moving on from a Hallelujah, there's one song that didn't make the final cut of the album, and it's called Forget Her, and it came just days before sessions were due to end. Jeff brought the song in half finished, and they work up a quick arrangement on the spot. And producer Andy Wallace and A&R man Steve Berkowitz were blown away by what they heard. Even though Jeff said the lyrics weren't finished, he was persuaded to take a shot at the vocals on the spot. And the lyrics that came out, presumably extemporaneously, were extremely and uncharacteristically venomous about a woman who was, quote, heartbreak the moment you met her. All assumed this was about his rapidly deteriorating relationship with his girlfriend, Rebecca Moore. The record executives, showing their trademark sensitivity and compassion, seems not to care. They felt like it was a hit, and they were thrilled upon hearing it. Forget Her was included on early test pressings of Grace, and it was even earmarked to be a single, but still, Jeff felt uneasy about it. And weeks after the sessions for Grace wrapped in the spring of 1994, he and his band gathered once again to record some B-sides, and Jeff decided to finish a new song that would become So Real, a title that always cracked me up. With the backing track for So Real complete, he took a walk around the block to finish the words, and much like Forget Her, it came very quickly. That one I produced live.
Oh, I was just thinking of the Jennifer Lopez song. Like, I'm real.
Oh, wow.
So real.
That one I produced live, all one moment, Buckley told Juice magazine in 1996. We recorded the vocal in one take, all in one take. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. Jeff ultimately decided to swap So Real in for Forget Her on the track list, a choice that led to much hand-wringing at Columbia. A&R man Steve Berkowitz says in David Brown's book Dream Brother, obviously I did not share Jeff's feeling. I thought Forget Her was the song the largest mass of people would be able to identify with. Label chiefs took Jeff to dinner at a fancy Upper West Side Italian restaurant and attempted to change his mind. Jeff was unmoved. I'm just imagining that meme of the guy sitting at the table at the sign that says "Change my mind" and a big
Change my mind.
Yeah. Jeff said, "If I hear that song again, I'm going to throw up." Not a whole lot anyone could really say to that, so the matter was dropped soon after. Jeff never spoke openly about his exact reasons for switching the songs, but most believe it was because he felt Forget Her was much too personal, and he didn't wish to put his ex on blast in such a way. Others believed he hated how much the studio executives loved it and was turned off by how chart-friendly it sounded. We kind of touched on this earlier. Jeff's suspicion of major label attention is something that he never really got over, and it's articulated in many notes that he'd written to himself and others that were compiled into the scrapbook Jeff Buckley, His Own Voice, in 2019. One memorable note reads, "I don't write my music for Sony. I write it for the people who are screaming down the road, crying to a full blast stereo. There's also music I'll make that will never, ever, ever be for sale. This is my music alone. This is my true home, from which all things are born and from which all my life will spring untainted and unworried, fully of my own body."
Yeah, okay, buddy.
I was waiting. I'm amazed it took this long in this episode to get to that point with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible for me to have anything but retroactive scorn for people griping about the music industry throwing them millions of dollars. Like,
they didn't know how bad it was going to get.
Yeah, they sure didn't. I mean, God, there's like, if Buckley was like alive today, there would be like 4,000 kids like burying him on TikTok before he even made it to Shanae. Like, yeah, never mind.
Do like coffee shop musicians still even, is that still even a thing? I mean, I like to hope it is.
It's certainly the only economically viable thing anymore. What, are you going to take a band on tour?
True. So Columbia hated that he edged out Forget Her for So Real. And another thing Columbia hated was the cover for Grace, or rather, Jeff's choice for a cover portrait. For those of you who don't remember, it depicts Jeff clad in a woman's sequin jacket with his eyes soulfully closed, clutching a vintage microphone. It was shot by his friend Mary Cyril, who recalls Jeff showing up at her Williamsburg studio at the end of 1993. She recalled in Jeff Buckley, From Hallelujah to the Last Goodbye, "We shot it in this loft belonging to my friend Billy. The loft had weird architecture, vaulted ceilings, and a lot of natural light in the stairwells, which was beautiful. Billy had made a small stage area inside the loft. He actually did little events there with cabaret acts. Jeff had brought this duffel bag full of his clothes, all smashed in there, none of them pressed or even clean. There was a giant bed, and Jeff emptied his bag onto it and spread his clothes all over the bed. I selected items from what he'd brought to go with each setup, and the jacket that he wore when ultimately became the cover photo was obtained from a local thrift shop, and he called it his Judy Garland glitter jacket." Photographer Mary Sill added to author Jeff Apter, "There was one point when he was eating this banana, and I went, okay, it's sort of Sid Vicious meets Leonard Cohen meets Elvis, or something like that. Even in the ones where he's looking so broody from a comic series of pictures, he was just around, you know?" He's actually listening to a playback of the song Dream Brother in the cover shot, which is ultimately what drew him to it. When presented with an assortment of potential images, Jeff immediately pointed to it and said, "This is the one. I love it because I'm listening to music." It basically showed him at peace. Label executives, however, were not at peace. It's the theme of this section. They were disturbed by his lack of eye contact, not to mention his glam rock attire. Sony head Don Einer was very much not pleased, apparently shouting, "He looks like a sound singer," upon seeing the photo. He toned it down a bit when being interviewed for the book Dream Brother a few years later, after Jeff's death. "The sparkly jacket sent a different message than we wanted," he said. "It was a little flashy, we thought, compared to the earthiness of Shanae. We tried to steer him away from it." Others at the label thought it made him look like Adam Ant, the 80s new wave, slightly
New
ridiculous.
romantic.
You're right. New romantic.
That was the term they preferred.
Kind of more ridiculous than new wave?
It is, yeah.
Yes, okay, good.
Because the makeup.
Makeup, yeah. Jeff fought for days. His co-manager said it was like pulling teeth, but eventually he got the photo that he wanted. And photographer Mary Searle had a very interesting take on the choice. She said it captured his, quote, split personality. He wanted to be on this major label and get all this worldwide exposure, but he also wanted to act like he was on an indie label. I think he envied that freedom he had in the beginning at Shanae, when he wasn't being judged by the specific point of view.
I don't know. He was so handsome. Like, I don't know. Speaking of Jeff Buckley's handsomeness, now we have to talk about the movie and the Kmart ad.
One of Aesop's less successful fables.
Like most creative people who are super attractive but want to be taken seriously, Jeff had an uneasy relationship with his handsomeness because he feared it distracted from his art. He was, for example, mortified when People magazine named him one of the 50 most beautiful people of 1995. And when a fan asked him to sign the issue, he set about playfully defacing it.
The funny part is we know the people who would have been choosing.
Yeah, some of those people when we were there in 1995. But when Jeff was young and hungry, he used his face to help pay the bills. His face if he was lucky.
And I wrote that too, and it didn't even occur to me. Oh.
While competing with the cappuccino machine at Shanae, he tried out for acting gigs, even auditioning to play a Kmart shopper in an ad. He was turned down, but then the Gap approached him the following year. This time he turned them down, apparently because he'd been fired as a clerk at Banana Republic, part of the Gap family of brands, years earlier.
For being inaccurately accused of shoplifting, apparently.
Oh, fascinating.
I thought when you're attractive, you can just take things. He probably thought so, too.
Following the release and success of Grace, though, Buckley started to get better acting offers. According to co-manager Dave Laurie, he was asked to play the role of the student in the 1996 Barbra Streisand film, The Mirror Has Two Faces. Jordan, tell us about The Mirror Has Two Faces.
I have no idea, but I believe that part went on to be played uncredited by Eli Roth.
That's sickening. He got offered that role, and that was one of many, Laurie says, in a wished-for song. He turned down a lot of money to write the theme song for a Quentin Tarantino film. That's wacky.
Yeah. So wait a minute. I mean, it could really only be...
Yeah, go ahead.
It could only be Pulp Fiction, which came out in 94, which means that they would have asked him when he was like a young upcoming, or Jackie Brown in 97.
It has to be Jackie Brown by process of elimination, because Pulp Fiction is all like found sounds. I don't think there's an original song in there.
No, you're right, but I just can't imagine.
And it would have been
Jackie
if that was
Brown.
in production if that was in production in 1993. I don't think he would have. Yeah, there's no way that he would have been in contention for that.
But Jackie Brown? I just can't imagine a Jeff Buckley song in a blaxploitation parody. It's not really a parody.
It's not really a parody.
No, you're right.
I don't actually. Now that I'm
Pastiche.
now that I'm looking at it, Jackie Brown doesn't have contemporaneous music either. Oh wait, I lied. It has Slash's Snake Pit. Slash from Guns N' Roses' solo project. Can you guess the name?
Of what? Name of the song?
Yes.
I'll
I'll just stop you right now. It's an instrumental track called Jizz de Pit.
What's the middle word?
Da.
Oh, okay.
Lowercase da. He can say that, though. This has to have been some kind of, like, Miramax thing, where they were like, let's get a hot young guy to write this song. I have no idea. I can't find any.
Maybe it was unrealized. Maybe Quentin was like, "Oh man, Buckley doesn't want to do a song. Well, all right. Well, I guess I'll do Jackie Brown."
That is funny. I wonder what unrealized. Does Quentin Tarantino have a bunch of unrealized projects?
I almost could see him not. I could see him just being like, "This is what I want to do," and then
Yeah. Oh no, there's a Wikipedia for unrealized projects. Untitled Luke Cage film. That makes sense. The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
oh wow, well that got made eventually.
Yeah, a remake of Lucio Fulci's Giallo movie, an untitled Silver Surfer film, untitled Green Lantern film, untitled Iron Man film. Maybe it was for this film, The Killer Inside Me. I don't know. This is going to haunt me. This is like really going to haunt my life. Instead, Buckley would throw himself into a new album. He tapped Tom Verlaine of Television to produce the follow-up to Grace, overseeing tortured sessions that dragged on for months. We should mention also that in between this, Buckley and his band went on tour for like a year and a half. And I think relationships between the drummer and the rest of the band broke down around that time. So that was also an issue that he was facing.
Why did that happen?
I don't know. I just saw that cited as like a complicating factor in the time between the tour and his follow-up. And so he was living in Memphis in February of 1997. He was performing there under a lot of unassumed name or a lot of fake names, and had a little shotgun shack that he liked so much he offered to buy it from the owner. And, you know, the quiet part out loud is that that's where he died. He waded into a channel of the Mississippi called, what is it? It's called something.
Wolf River.
Yeah. In May of 1997, Buckley waded fully clothed into a channel of the Mississippi River called the Wolf River, and his roadie Keith Fody told Rolling Stone that as Buckley waded in, he said, "You can't swim in there." Buckley was cold sober, as toxicology reports would later reveal, and in Fody's recollection of this event in the Rolling Stone, he said that he saw a boat coming down the channel and was trying to warn Jeff to swim back to shore. And as the boat passed, Jeff was caught in its wake and undertow, and he vanished from sight. His body washed up 5 days later at the feet of Memphis's famed Beale Street. His final recordings would be released as a posthumous record called Sketches for My Sweetheart the Drunk in May of 1998, a year after his death, in a project that was largely shepherded along by Chris Cornell, but one that may have pissed off Buckley, who was a known perfectionist. But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yes.
Jordan.
Grace was released in August 1994. It didn't exactly set the charts on fire. The string-laden Last Goodbye cracked the top 20 of Billboard's alternative song charts. I didn't write that. Thank you for adding. Yes, thank you. But still, it earned critical acclaim from some of the most respected names in the industry. David Bowie, speaking to Pulse, cited the album as one he'd take with him to a desert island. High praise. Paul McCartney visited Jeff backstage during a show at New York's Roseland Ballroom, R.I.P. Bono declared the singer, quote, a pure drop in an ocean of noise in the U2 fan magazine Propaganda, and later dedicated numerous shows on the Pop Mart tour to Jeff following his death. Is that the one where they would bring like cars and stuff? And
Yeah. Is there no one cool that Bono won't attach himself to in an effort to seem cooler?
were we just talking about somebody who was like, yeah, oh no, it was Moby. Moby was like, Bono said it was cool, right?
Maybe, yes, around this time.
Tom York reportedly recorded his vocals for the Benz track Fake Plastic Trees after witnessing Buckley perform at the Garage in London. Radiohead producer John Leckie later observed, it made Tom realize you could sing in a falsetto without sounding dripping. Make of that what you will. That's a bit of British slang I don't know.
That performance of Fake Plastic Trees is incredible.
On the record, or is there a live one?
Yeah, on the record. I mean, that's one of my favorite Radiohead songs, actually.
Oh.
Yeah.
In the weeks after his death, Jeff's mother told Now magazine, even Bob Dylan, in an interview with the French magazine, named Jeff as one of the great songwriters of this decade. This is hilarious to me because Jeff once pissed Bob off with an onstage impression of him in November of 1993, leading him to write his Columbia label mate a contrite letter, which is featured in the aforementioned scrapbook that was published a few years back. He writes in part, the truth is that I was off on a tangent, on a stage, my mind going where it goes, trying to be funny. And it wasn't funny at all. And I f***ed up. The letter, you can see it in full. It's pretty funny. But for Jeff Buckley, the one-time metalhead who grew up worshiping Led Zeppelin, the most meaningful praise came from Jimmy Page himself. I love this. An early collaborator remembers asking Jeff about his professional 5-year plan when he was like probably 17, 18. And he said, I want to make an album that makes people forget about Led Zeppelin 2. So this was part of the plan from early on.
It's interesting, though, because I think he said that Led Zeppelin 2 was the record that his stepdad gave him that, like, blew his mind as far as heavy music went. But he later said Led Zeppelin 3 was really his favorite. And you can hear it because, like, that's their quote-unquote weird one that has, like, a lot more drone. And it's when Jimmy Page, like, had heard John Fahey and was playing in a bunch of, like, finger-picking and open tuning stuff. It's just a wider ranging record. I think you can hear that. Tangerine is like such a pretty one, and I think that's like the pretty Zeppelin album to me. Yeah, like Gallows Pole, That's the Way, Hats Off to Roy Harper. Anyway.
Well, this all worked out for Jeff because Jimmy Page turned out to be as big a fan of him as he was of Led Zeppelin. Page called Jeff the best technical singer that's appeared in 2 decades. I started to play Grace constantly, he said in a 2002 BBC documentary. And the more I listened to the album, the more I appreciated Jeff's talents and Jeff's total ability, to which he was just a wizard. It was close to being my favorite album of the decade. And when Jimmy and Jeff crossed paths in person, they apparently cried upon meeting each other. Friend Chris Dowd told Uncut in 2015, they actually cried when they met each other. Jimmy heard himself in Jeff, and Jeff was meeting his idol. Jimmy Page was the godfather of Jeff's music. A lot of people thought Tim Buckley was an influence on Jeff, but it was really Zeppelin. Jeff also said he cried when he met Robert Plant at a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction dinner around the same period, too. And this is so sweet. Not only was Jimmy Page a big fan, but let's say you know you're the best kind of fan. He was evangelical about Buckley. He took his friend Robert Plant to one of Jeff's concerts. This went down when they were touring together as Page and Plant in the mid-'90s. Jimmy Page continued, we actually made a point of going to hear him play, and it was absolutely scary. One of the things that was a little frightening was that I was convinced that he probably did things in tunings, and he didn't. He was doing things in standard tunings. I thought, oh gee, he really is clever, isn't he? He quite clearly had his feet on the ground and his imagination was flying way, way out there, beyond.
That must have been so humbling for Robert Plant. Like, wow, this guy's better than I was at my peak, which was 30 years ago.
He was a huge fan. He called the performance mind-altering in a 2010 interview with QTV. Spectacular singing, he said, and so much conviction. And this is where the Behind the Music soundtrack shifts into a minor key. Jeff was cheerfully singing Whole Lotta Love to himself on the night of May 29th, 1997, when he went for that swim in the Wolf River. Floating on his back and taking in the evening summer sky, he spent his last moments alive joyously celebrating the music that had provided his creative spark. As his mother would later reflect, if that's not a state of grace, I don't know what is. And honestly, I think that's probably the best ending we could possibly have, so I think we'll just leave it there. Heigl, what do you think?
I mean, yeah, that's it. Just go check out Jeff Buckley. If you want to hear the limits of what a voice and an instrument can do. My name is Alex Heigl.
And my name is Jordan Runtagh. We'll catch you next time.
Too Much Information was a production of iHeart Radio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The show's supervising producer is Michael Alder June.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeart Radio, visit the iHeart Radio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.